another session of the ML2 Open Lecture Series. Before I do the formal introduction, I thought it would be fitting to make a very brief statement in light of recent events. As you all know, we are in the middle of some turmoil where public school teachers are striking for some of their rights and claiming for the government. If, as an academic unit, we haven't made official statements, that should not be considered lack of interest or lack of concern or lack of care. It should be taken as a very cautious position where the program from the coordinator down is remaining very vigilant to the change of events, to the evolution of the situation. And we're already talking to other people within the university of the program to follow this carefully enough so that in due time, and when the university and the faculty of education, the school of education consider it proper and pertinent and adequate, we will make the proper statements to express how we feel about the situation. But I insist, our silence should not be considered lack of care, should not be considered that we are oblivious to what's going on. It should be considered a very cautious and vigilant silence where we are keeping track of the events as they evolve on a daily basis. With that said, good afternoon. On behalf of the MA in Learning and Teaching Processing in Second Languages, I offer you the warmest welcome to this new session of the ML2 Open Lecture Series, or Cátedra Abierta ML2, as we would call it when the sessions take place in Spanish. The ML2 Open Lecture Series is an initiative from our master's program that intends to provide the language academic community at UPB and Medellín with a window to discover who we are and what we do. Each of our lectures has always been linked to a different course in our curriculum, both in the English and in Spanish emphases. Each lecture features either distinguished guest speakers from Colombia and abroad, or interventions by a qualified faculty. You will have the chance to participate in the lecture with the graduate students, and in a way, attend our class session with them. This is actually by design. All Open Lecture Series sessions will take place either on Fridays at 4 p.m. or on Saturdays at 8 a.m. aligning with the class schedule. Past presenters in the ML2 Open Lecture Series have featured respected scholars from Colombia and abroad. Topics we have covered in previous sessions have included new literacy studies in multimodality, technology in the classroom, self-determination theory, digital literacies, narrative research, and identity in the teaching of English and Spanish. This year, we have already featured one presenter from the United States, and we'll feature another one today, and in a few weeks we'll present another one from Colombia and one from Spain. We expect that the ML2 Open Lecture Series continues to provide a space for teachers, professional development in the city. We also hope it will provide incentive for those in attendance to eventually join the ML2 community as graduate students or even faculty. This is also a way for us to give back to our community that has been so welcoming to our proposals. The ML2 Open Lecture Series is not an endeavor that one person or even a program can carry alone. While this event is an initiative proposed by the MA in Learning and Teaching Processes in Second Languages, turning this idea into a blossoming reality has been a collective effort. I would especially like to thank the Literacies in Second Languages project, the Faculty of Education, and the Advanced Education System for their support. It is now my honor to introduce our distinguished featured speaker for today's ML2 Open Lecture Series, Dr. Shelbie White. Dr. White is an associate professor and coordinator in English education in the School of Teacher Education at the Florida State University. He is the director of the Initiative for 21st Century Literacy Research at this university. She studies 21st century literacies and multimodal approaches to adolescent literacy learning, particularly in middle grades. She has published her research in multiple top-quality international journals and shared her research as a keynote speaker, and conference responder, and conference presenter at the international, national, regional, and state conferences. Dr. White teaches graduate and undergraduate courses including methods at the middle and high school level, issues and trends, linguistics, popular culture and pedagogy, and technology integration. She also holds National Board Certification in Early Adolescence English Language Arts. She holds a PhD in Curriculum and Instruction with an emphasis on English Education and Technology from Kansas State University, an MS in English Education from Kansas State University, and a BSc in Instructional Leadership and Academic Curriculum with an emphasis in English Education from the University of Oklahoma. It is truly an honor to introduce Dr. White today. The initiative for 21st Century Literacies Research was the first project that actually answered the calls for collaboration from the Literacies in Second Language project, and they have actively participated in this effort through the affiliated faculty and doctoral students. In addition, she is at present one of the leading literacy researchers around the world, so it is a pleasure for us to have her as part of this distinguished lineup of scholars at the ML2 Open Lecture Series. Today's talk, The Butterfly Effect, Finding Our Power and Voice Through Literacy's capital R, lowercase r research, will discuss how small-scale research, such as the one that many of our graduate students and practitioners carry out in their institutions and communities, can actually be the source of high impact that should not be overlooked. Now, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's give Dr. White a warm welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me okay. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Yes? Thank you. Oh, you're all beautiful. I love the room. Thank you for spending a Friday with me. I don't know that it's traditional here for students and researchers to want to spend a Friday evening listening to more research. So I so appreciate those of you that are there and have an interest in what I have to share with you today. Just a note of thanks, briefly. I'd like to say thank you to Raul for inviting me to be a part of the work that you're doing there. I think it's really important as we work in literacy to find different ways to work with one another, and the relationship that Florida State University has with your university and your program is very important to our work. And so thank you very much for having me there. Raul, if we can go on to slide 3. I'll talk just a minute about the overview of what I want to share with you today. I'm a pretty interactive lecturer, so I'm going to ask you all to participate and share and talk to the person next to you and maybe even talk to me a little bit. So, yes, those of you that are trying to squish down in your seats, yes, I'm going to ask you some things. Because I think a part of literacy research is learning from the people you're presenting to as well. So I'm very anxious to hear about how things, your input about how things work. But briefly, I'm going to talk about my research context. I think the context of where I come from and the work that I've done is important to shape kind of my points of view and my thinking. And then I'm going to kind of take us on a wild ride with butterfly effect and chaos theory. Are there any scientists in the room that even know what that may be? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so what does that have to do with literacies? Well, we're going to try to make a metaphor and analogy there. And then we're going to talk about big research versus little research. So big R research versus little R research, and what's the difference? And then the power that little research can have to make a really big impact, especially in your community, and how to turn small questions into large impacts there. So that's the journey I'm taking you on today. So I'm looking forward to talking with you. So my literacy context is shaped by where I'm from. So I was born and raised in the state of Oklahoma. Have any of you heard of Oklahoma before? What do you know about Oklahoma?
What did you say?
It's far.
It's far.
Yeah, it's far away from you, yeah. Anything else? Oh, is there a Sooner fan in the room? It made my that's too bad. No. So there's a musical made within our state called Oklahoma. There's tornadoes in Oklahoma. Do you have tornadoes down there? Yeah. You know, yeah. So Oklahoma has kind of a very unique history, a very unique context from which it was settled by all of the Native Americans that were in the United States were forced to relocate to the state of Oklahoma when white people moved in and tried to settle the country. And so I come from a long line of Native Americans. I'm a Cherokee Indian, and my family has a long lineage of Cherokee Indians that were forced to move to Oklahoma from the East Coast when folks came over from all parts of the other continent. So I think that's important to know. I grew up in Oklahoma, and I taught in the very same school that I went to school in. So when I finished my degree and became a teacher, I got to teach alongside the very people that taught me in those grades, which I think made for a very interesting literacy experience for me. I also taught in the state of Kansas. Does anyone know where Kansas is? What do you know about Kansas? Yeah, right. Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. It's very flat, so there are lots of tornadoes. Most people associate Kansas with the Wizard of Oz and Dorothy. That's absolutely correct. And I taught on a military installation. I taught on Fort Riley, which means all of my students had parents that were in the military, which was a very different context and ecology from where I come from. They had their own sorts of issues to deal with, right? If your parent's a soldier, it's a very different lifestyle, especially if they're deployed, and most of them were, to the Middle East at the time. So that came with its own challenges. And then I think what I really wanted you to understand from my experience there is that I have faced teaching situations and teaching challenges that are shaped by the very ecologies in which they're situated, meaning that the school districts in which I worked for, the towns in which the school districts were located, really had strong influences on the ways in which I could teach and the things that they expected of us. Would you say that it's kind of like that where you are now? That your school districts and your city expect certain things of your teachers in the classrooms there?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. And so, did anybody have a comment on that? It sounded like there were some strikes going on or something. Is that what you were talking about before when we started?
That's what the slide showing. Right now we're in the middle of some issues with the public sector, basically some issues with government. Salaries, healthcare, the works.
Yeah, so certainly it's a time where citizens are wanting to speak out about the things they value, the things they feel are important. And as teachers, we need to find ways to do that. So that's part of what I want to talk to you about today. So if we go to the next slide, slide 6, I kind of already talked about that. But my literacies point of view has really been shaped by my personal experiences, my professional experiences, and then you intertwine that with the communities in which I teach. And I think that really kind of frames my thinking in a way that may be different from yours, but I do think we can learn a lot from one another just based on that. 21st century literacies, have you heard that term before? 21st century literacies. On the slide that defines that, the National Council of Teachers of English, which is a membership organization in the United States, but really does have a global reach, is a group of about 50,000 English teachers that come together at conference and network together and learn from one another. And back in 2008, so not too long ago, there was a real need to define what it means to be literate. What does it mean to be literate where you are now? How do you decide whether or not someone is literate? Does anyone have how do you decide if someone is literate or not? Beautiful girl in the red tank top. Yes. Or the girl next to her in the black shirt. Yeah. What does it mean to be literate?
If someone can read and write.
Yeah. Yeah, right. To be able to read and write, to communicate. Yeah. So, how does that change with technology, though? Are you literate if you can't use a computer? If your only means of communicating is by computer and you don't know how to use it, are you literate?
I guess not. Yes, we can communicate.
You're not illiterate, right? But maybe you don't have all of the literacies necessary to succeed in the 21st century. Okay, so let's take a look at the definition you have there in front of you. Literacy has always been a collection of cultural and communicative practices shared among members of particular groups. As society and technology change, so does literacy. Because technology has increased the intensity and complexity of literate environments, the 21st century demands that a literate person possess a wide range of abilities and competencies, many literacies. These literacies are multiple, dynamic, and malleable. As in the past, you're inextricably linked with histories, life possibilities, and social trajectories of particular groups. So in the very next slide, they kind of delineate for us what that means. So a person in the 21st century has to be able to develop proficiency and fluency with tools of technology. Well, the tools of technology probably vary on your ecology and your community, right? So your community decides in some ways what literacies are available by what you have access to. Also, to be literate in the 21st century, you have to be able to build intentional cross-cultural connections and relationships with other people to solve problems together collaboratively, but ultimately in collaborations you want to strengthen independent thought as well. And so when you're a member of a certain ecology, you've got to try to stretch outside of what is your norm in order to be able to strengthen your own points of view and your own thinking, and to be able to work collaboratively with groups that you might not normally work with. They also suggest that you have to be able to design and share information for global communities to meet a variety of purposes. So persuasively, narratively, expositorily, we have to be able to decide what type of message you need to send and what way you send it and how you communicate that. And this one, the next one I think is most important in some of the work that I do, and that is to be able to take in all sorts of information simultaneously from all sorts of different sources. Do you multitask? Are you a multitasker? Do you listen to music and watch TV and Facebook and Twitter and do homework all at the same time? So you're taking in multiple streams of information at once, and I think it's important for us to be able to analyze and synthesize and make sense of that, while also not losing what the messages are and those sorts of things. And then to also be able to critique them. Do you believe everything that you read on the internet? Yeah, no. A lot of students in our schools have trouble differentiating between what is opinion and what is fact on the internet. And so we really want students to be able to evaluate what they're hearing and to decide for themselves if it is based in fact with citations and sources, or if it's really someone's opinion. And I think that's more and more important for students nowadays to be able to do that. And finally, to attend to the ethical responsibilities for all of that. What does ethics have to do with any of those things? Do we have an understanding of what ethics means? I may call on you if I can't hear you. So I'll give an example maybe to get started. Do you guys have issues with bullying? With getting bullied? Kids making fun of other kids? Okay. And so when we teach students to use technology, we have a responsibility as teachers to have them use it appropriately and not for bad reasons. And so sometimes in schools, teachers have to take a step back and help students understand that the ways in which they're using technology is not appropriate. For example, it's not appropriate to go into the school restroom and take pictures of people in the restroom and post them on Snapchat or Instagram. That's a violation of privacy, right? I think there are some students that don't understand the ethical ramifications of what they're doing, or taking pictures of themselves and thinking it's only going to one person when instead they're being shared in a very wide public way. And so with all of those issues wrapped up together, that's under the umbrella of 21st century literacies. And so I'm of the belief that you not only have to know how to read and to write well, but you've got to do all the things that we just talked about in order to be literate today. And so that really shapes my thinking there. So what does butterfly effect and chaos theory have to do with anything related to literacy? I'm going to ask Raul to play the Vimeo video that has a visual explanation of butterfly effect for me. There's a link there. Basically, chaos theory and butterfly effect, there's this understanding that if a butterfly flaps its wings, that surge of air that comes from flapping its wings can cause a hurricane to happen on the other side of the world. Okay, let that settle in for a minute. A butterfly flapping its wings in one part of the world can cause a chain of events to happen to cause a hurricane to happen on the other side of the world. Kind of like cause and effect. Have you heard of cause and effect before? Okay, so if we step back and look at it from afar, just one very little action can have a huge impact on an ecology. Follow me? Okay, so my thinking, and part of where I'm coming from, on if you go to the next slide, Raul, what does this mean to literacies research? That the teaching approaches, the pedagogical approaches that we take can change one student, can change a classroom of students, can change a school, can change a community. So the very decisions that teachers make can have a butterfly effect, a cause and effect that expands further and further and further. Okay, you following me? Good. Teachers' curricular decisions can impact a community's future. The very things that we entrust our teachers to teach and the values in which they instill in their students have an enormous impact on the community. Also, the questions that teachers have can be answered in their own classrooms, but can have a really big impact on the world. And I know that seems like a big jump to make, but I truly believe that the very questions that all of you are thinking about and grappling about can make a huge difference in the ways I teach my students and the ways my friends in the United States teach their students. So I think what the journey I want to take you on is to help you understand that little R research, just the very little questions that we tackle every day as classroom teachers and as pre-service teachers, can really have a big impact on teaching today. So if we go to the slide that says, what is research, number 13, Charles Kettering had a really nice way of positioning research as far as how to understand it. And he says that research is a high-hat word that scares a lot of people. Are you scared of research? Does the word scare you? Yes. Yeah, me too. It used to scare me big time, but it really shouldn't. Basically, he says it's simple. Research is nothing but a state of mind, a friendly, welcoming attitude towards change, going out to look for ways of changing instead of waiting for it to come. So if we can look at research and welcome it, it may not be as scary. He also says research is an effort to do things better and not to be caught asleep at the switch, for a different analogy. It is a problem-solving mind that really kind of helps us grapple with all the issues that we're dealing with in classrooms as teachers. And then on the next slide, Barbara Mikaloff says, asking questions. When you teach a lesson and half the class gives you a blank look, have you ever been there when the class gives you a blank look? You ask yourself, how else can I teach this concept? That's research. Okay? You observe and respond to what you have observed, and you begin to make some sort of pedagogical changes in order to help students learn the concepts better. I think every teacher on the planet does research every day. Would you consider that big R research or little R research? Little R? Raise your hand if you think little R. Yeah, okay, good. I would consider that little R research. At its best, on the next slide, teacher research is a natural extension of good teaching. To be a good teacher, you have to be a researcher. Let me say that one more time. To be a good teacher, you have to be a researcher. Now, does that mean that you have to publish your work and you have to go to conferences like Raul and present to AERA and publish your findings in journals? No, it doesn't mean you have to. And that if you don't, you're not a good teacher. But it does mean that you're constantly asking questions. So I'm going to help you think through ways to do that today, and hopefully kind of give you some ideas on how you can think about your work. So on the next slide, slide 17, so what's the difference between big R research and little R research? So if we're saying that classroom teachers asking questions and finding ways to do things better is little R research, then what's big R research? What's the difference? So maybe the magnitude of it? Mm-hmm. Take a minute and talk with your neighbor. What's the difference in big R research and little R research? And then I'll have you share out.
The time, the impact in the community. There are small communities, but maybe a big region of the country.
So I heard from some of those discussions tonight. this question of some of my students. The questions you see there on the screen were things that came up. Some of them thought that big art research meant that it's formal, meaning that you write a full research study and you get permissions to research. Some of them thought it was a difference in having money-funded research versus unfunded. Some of them thought there was a difference in quantitative and qualitative. Have you heard the differences of the two? And certainly some feel that there's a difference in published and unpublished. So something I want you to think about is big R and little r really can't be defined by the things that you see there on the screen. There's a lot of little r research that's funded in some ways. There's lots of big R research that's qualitative. And I think that there's a lot of little r research that's published. So please don't let those intuitions about research necessarily drive what you think to be important or not important. Little r research is just as important as big R research. Which one impacts students quicker? Yes, little R research. That's the one that makes the biggest impact right away. Okay, so let's move on to finding power and voice in the little r. What we need to know and what we wonder about our own ecologies. So, on slide 19, Linda Bissek says that teacher research means seeing what has been in front of us all the time. It means seeing something that we didn't expect to see, a sure sign of learning, since what we expect to see is what we already know. So it's kind of like taking something and looking at it differently for the first time. Okay? Rebecca Waters says, it is through the process of deliberately writing down my observations, systematically recording my reflections, routinely collecting and sorting out the papers, the patterns of teaching and learning going on around me, that I learn about my students and myself. Through this process, I attempt to answer, or at least approach answers to real questions. Okay? So I'm going to show, or I'm going to ask Raul to put up the slide for a poem by a man named William Stafford. And he writes about things he learned last week. And I'm going to ask you to brainstorm about some things that you learned last week by observing. And it can be in your personal life, it can be in your professional life, but what's something that you learned last week? I'm going to read the poem to you. It's 2 slides long. Ants, when they meet each other, usually pass on the right. Sometimes you can open a sticky door with your elbow. A man in Boston has dedicated himself to telling about injustice. For $3,000, he will come to your town and tell you about it. Schopenhauer was a pessimist, but he played the flute. Yeats, Pound, and Eliot saw art as growing from another art, and they studied that. If I ever die, I'd like it to be in the evening. That way, I'll have all the dirt to go with me, and no one will see how I begin to hobble along. In the Pentagon, one person's job is to take pins out of towns, hills, and fields, and then save the pins for later. Okay, really strange poem, but the poet is trying to help us understand that he's looking at life in a different way than he has before. That he didn't know that somebody in the Pentagon gets a paycheck for taking little pins out of a map and putting them in a bowl and taking them out of the bowl and putting them onto the map. He didn't know that ants, when they pass one another, always go to the right. So in observing the world, he found answers and interesting questions all around him. So on the next slide, what I'm going to ask you to do, since you don't have paper there in front of you, I don't really need you to write it down, but I want you to think of some things that you learned through this year, either as a personal experience or a professional experience. And then how did you learn it, and did you share what you learned? So let's take 2 or 3 minutes, share with someone next to you, and then I may ask for some volunteers to share out here in just a minute, okay? So go ahead and discuss things you learned. Okay, thank you everyone. So I asked you to consider things that you learned and how you learned them, and did you share what you learned. So can someone share with us something that they learned this year, how they learned it, and how, and if you shared what you learned?
Okay, I will share my experience about my children. I work with K grade, and I have a reading center in my classroom, and I have observed that the students that, the literacy learners that have more interest to watch books because they do not reading, they are just trying to understand that those symbols that are called letters can make words. They just watch books. The children that really enjoy those reading centers can have more vocabulary when they are talking, describing pictures, or describing narrating the story. They have more abilities than those students that are not interested in the reading center, or also that they get the difference about uppercase letters and lowercase letters, and I haven't teach them that part, or haven't taught them that part. They just realize that there are big letters, small letters. That is something that I have observed in my classroom. And those literacy learners that maybe families do not promote the reading or the interested in books, they have lower vocabulary, they have lower expressions, and they are not involved in the ways of literacy development.
Congratulations, you are a researcher. There is nothing to be afraid of. You have just established yourself as someone who thinks about what's happening, and you ask questions about how it's happening, and you're coming to some sort of some hypotheses for how it's happening and why things are happening. There is nothing to be afraid of. Now, are you required to show impact of how your teaching is impacting the students in your classrooms? Are you required to show that your teaching is making a difference with your students?
I'm just starting in my research.
Okay. So what I love about how you framed what you said is that it's coming from a genuine place of interest, and I think that's key. If you don't write anything else down that I say, this is what you need to write down. If you're not interested in it, it likely won't be successful. Okay, you've got to research things that you find interesting and questions that you truly have. If you don't have a vested interest, if you don't have a real reason to want to know it, it's going to be very hard for you to find the answers that you want to, because you're going to lack the motivation to do that. We are more motivated by the things we care about, right? So clearly you care about what you just shared with us, and I think that's really important. Did anyone else want to share something that you learned and how you came about to learn that?
I have noticed that in this year I have given the opportunity to my students to write texts about their own lives and their experience. And it has been a very successful thing for me, because I noticed that they are more motivated, and they are learning things that are meaningful for them, for their
to hear you. If the person sitting next to the computer can kind of synthesize that for me.
Oh, he's having them write about their own lives. So
Okay.
she feels that now that they're writing about themselves, about their own experiences, that they seem to be more motivated when it comes to their writings.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a huge field of big R research about that very thing. And you figured it out on your own, right? From your own experiences. Absolutely. You can immediately change the instructional experiences of the students in which you come into contact with because you learned that. That's very important. Excellent job. Anyone else want to share?
I have one. One, that I learned that most students leave everything for the last minute, and that most work well with a little bit of pressure, but most fall apart with too much pressure.
Yeah. So what do you learn from that lesson then? What can you predict, or how can you change your teaching from what you know?
Especially when it comes to evaluation, stuff like that. Not to stress so much the weight of grades and the pressure of looking at the class. Just make it a more relaxing atmosphere without taking away what I'm evaluating, without making it too easy to where they're not learning anything. But yeah, it's not making a stressful experience.
Absolutely, right. And there's a lot of big R research out there about getting to know the students you have in order to help them be successful. And you did that on your own just through observing and figuring out what makes them click and what doesn't. So bravo, excellent. I think all of you have a way of looking at your environment or your ecology, your classroom environment, and making decisions about your pedagogy based on what you've observed, and I think that's really important, so bravo. Any questions so far before I move on? So was there one? No. Okay, so let's create your own butterfly effect then. So I'm going to ask each of you to leave here today with a butterfly effect question, meaning a question that is a small little R research question that you can take and think about and try to find answers to, and then share broadly enough to where you might have an impact in a classroom somewhere else. And I may even ask Raul to share some of these with some of the lessons you learned with me, so I can share them with teachers here in Florida so they can learn from what you've learned. And I think that's how we go about growing and becoming better as teachers, is sharing what we learn with one another, okay? So on slide 25, think about the things that you learned that I just asked you to do. And then what I'm going to try to get you to do in these next few steps is change it into a research question. So those of you in the audience that have a lot of research background, I beg your indulgence just for a moment as we kind of walk through ways to think about research questions in ways that aren't scary. Because I think research questions can really be scary to people that don't have a research background. So I'm giving you 3 very basic general research questions that may come from things that one wonders about. So, for example, I wonder why Todd always gets discipline referrals in my class, but he never gets discipline referrals in science class. Or, I wonder how Melissa sees herself as a student in my class. Does she think she's a good student or a bad student? I wonder how my 9th grade students, so that's high school for us, I wonder how my high school students feel about their independent reading assignment. So if we go into the next slide, clarifying questions, it's really important for you to think about the things that you wondered about and then to form them in a way that's a question. So take 30 seconds, turn to your neighbor, and I want you to try to take the very thing that you learned, that you talked about previously, and form it in the form of a question. So take a minute and do that. So I want you to say your question out loud to the person next to you. Would anyone like to share a question they came up with?
Yes, I do it.
Yay, thank you.
Okay, so the statement that I said, the observation that I had before, I became into a question. So I wonder why my students that show an interest in books develop real knowledge earlier than those that do not show interest in books. Would be like that.
Very nice. Lovely. You did a good job because you didn't ask a yes or no question. You want to make sure that you don't ask a question that ends in just yes or ends in just no, and you've left it open-ended where you can really go in lots of different places with it. Very good. Lovely. Anyone else?
How can I enhance their competence in my students to the use of web-based?
Can someone nearer to the computer repeat that for me?
How can I enhance oral competence in my students through the
How can you
web-based?
enhance oral competence from students on what?
WebQuest.
With the use of
With the use of WordQuest.
WebQuest.
Oh, lovely. Yes, absolutely. I would love to read that study. Yeah, do that and then publish it so I can read it. I would love to know that. Excellent job. So I think you have a feel for the question, so I'm going to skip ahead on some of these slides because you guys are way ahead of where some of the people that I've spoken with about this have been. So let's skip to slide 33. So once you have a good question, it says. Once you have a good question. So what do you do once you have this question? Well, then you have to kind of figure out how you're going to get the answers to the questions, right? So you've got to figure out what data you need to collect. So the question that was just asked about the WordQuest, what kind of data would you need to collect in order to answer your question?
Well, I had to read about what is the WebQuest, the actor, how the teacher have used the WebQuest, and what stories have been done already about WebQuest.
Okay, good. And for the reading centers, young lady, what data would you need to collect?
What kind of books they prefer, if they prefer books with letters or just pictures, maybe how many times they go to the reading center, and
Okay, so you just said at least two things that are, so you want to know the frequency for which they're reading certain books, so you want to count frequencies, and then you want to know which books they like, which means you have to talk to them, right? So you can interview them, you can do a focus group with a group of students, you can give them a survey. So there are lots of different ways you can get the information that you need. Very good. So once you have all of this data collected to answer your questions, and you think you have some answers to your questions, what's next? So if you take a look at the slide, once you have a good question, you're going to collect your data, analyze your data, you're going to interpret it and describe it, and then what are you going to do? How do we make a butterfly effect happen with the answers to the questions that you've made? So if you go to the next slide, back to the butterfly. How do you transition from making local pedagogical decisions based on research to making a bigger impact on pedagogy across the world? So how does the research on reading centers that she's going to do, how's that going to impact teaching in Florida or Kansas or Oklahoma or England or wherever? How does she go about doing that? So where do you share your findings? What are some things that you can do? Yes, so there's all sorts of ways to do publish, right? So publishing, how? If you want your peers to review it in a peer review way and it to be in print, what would you do? You would write it up probably, yeah, right, in an article or some sort of manuscript and share that in a journal. But what if you wanted to share it and not do a journal or a publication? How else can you publish? Think 21st century now. How? How would you do that?
On a blog, you could send it to your website.
Yes. There's some actual data out there to suggest that more people read blogs that teachers write than read those academic journals that professor people like me write for. And that more teachers in classrooms have impact on the actual teaching that's happening because of blogging, and they're tweeting about it, and they're sharing in broader ways, in global ways. So what are some online resources besides blogs where you could share what you've learned while also making sure not to share private student information besides blogs? What else could you do? Could you do a video chat and do like a short lecture on a video and share that?
You can even do some like small conferences or workshops,
Mm-hmm.
even local wise, and then it can easily be put out on the web. That's what we're doing now.
Right, absolutely. I think that's the quickest way to get your information out there. The average turnaround of a written manuscript is 9 to 12 months. That's a really long time to wait to share what you've learned with other people. So I really encourage you to think about alternate ways of sharing to create a butterfly effect really quickly. Let's go on to the educational landscape and talk a little bit about policy. The slide that says who has the power. Sometimes we face in the United States policymakers who do not quite understand why teachers do what they do and how they do it, and instead depend solely on test scores to determine whether or not a teacher is doing a good job. Have you heard stories about that? Yeah. Does that happen there? Where you are? How is a teacher determined to be a good teacher in your city?
If you're a good teacher, they have teacher evaluations.
Mm-hmm.
What's the thing that teacher always the teacher evaluations?
They have like a standardized test, and I don't know, let's say it's 11th grade, and they rate the schools based on the scores, right? The ICFES? But that's not ICFES.
No.
Right, but teachers, that's told they're good at teachers based on that.
Are you saying that's how it is there?
Yeah, I mean, they do have that.
Okay, in some schools.
But for example, like, for us, like there's every course the students have to grade the teacher. Actually, they cannot get their scores unless they do the teacher evaluation. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, they have to do that.
Well, that's something I learned today. I need to write that down on the things I learned today. That's interesting. That's not at all the case here in that way. But certainly test scores matter to the policymakers. The policymakers in the United States are typically the legislators are senators and congressmen who decide how our schools should be run. And they often don't listen to what teachers have to say before they make those decisions. And so I think it's really important, if you look at the slide, to think about the power that the butterfly effect, your small research, could have. What stakeholders have the ultimate power and authority over your decisions as a teacher? And to show them your little R research, that you are asking questions, that you are trying to find new, better, different, alternative approaches in order to help your students learn. And also, you always need to know what big R research says about the things that you are curious about also, so that you can compare what you're learning to what the bigger studies have also learned. So make sure that if someone who is trying to make a decision about your schools asks you a question, that you will be able to answer it. So if they want to know why she's using reading centers, she can answer why she's using reading centers from her own personal experiences, for example. And then you want to also show them what big research says about those sorts of things as well. So I encourage you, I plead with you, I beg you to start asking questions about your teaching approaches and share them in ways that can really make an impact globally through Facebook shares, Twitter shares, video shares, and so on. The next slide talks about advocating. I want you all to be advocates. And that means that you are going to be your own advocates for the things that you're doing in your classroom. Share your successes. Some of the best things I've ever learned as a researcher came from teachers talking about not their successes, though. They came from talking about the things they struggled with and had a hard time with. The things that they weren't sure how to figure out, and so we worked through those together. Those have been the best types of learning experiences for me. So I encourage you to get involved and share the things that you're learning with other people. I want to skip ahead to this lovely poem and picture on slide 38. Does everyone see that? Slide 38. This is a young Navajo Indian. I want to share this. This was a poem written by a classroom teacher, and her student was Sabrina. And I want to share with you this poem because I think it really speaks to what little R research is all about. When I first met Sabrina in her trailer deep in the canyon, she sang to me a song of love, without sensible words, but with a clean melody and a voice like a bell. She spoke another language, some dialect of English, that comes from spending most of every day and night of your first 6 years in the pocket of a canyon. Sabrina stood when we sat. She wobbled when we ran. She drew identical red and black drawings of her family while we drew houses and rockets, flowers and trucks. Then one day Sabrina asked to sing us her song about love. And we listened very carefully, trying to find the pattern and the meaning of it. And it was still without sensible words, but with a clean melody and her voice like a bell. Now Sabrina dances while she sings, and she twirls an imaginary skirt. It is large and billowing, and her voice is more like a bell. It is round and deep, and we want to hear it. Sabrina prays at Georgia's going away party with the fervor and fluency of her own ministry. Jesus, bless this pizza and bless George because we love him. And thank you, Jesus, for my daddy's new blue car because I love to ride in it. And this is a song too. What counts as teacher research? Sabrina is a question. Her words, songs, prayers, and dances are my data, and the poem is the way into them. What counts as teacher research? Words, songs, poems, pictures, dances, stories, children's questions, teachers' questions, close attention, shifting perspective, altered practice, new ways of thinking about learning. All of those things that I just shared with you from that wonderful poem from Karen Gaulis really speaks to the heart of what Little Research is all about. So I thank you so much for your time today, and I'm open for questions. I'm sure that you may have a few, and thanks so much for having me.